Lovely. Thanks very much, Claire. Good evening, or rather late afternoon to everybody. And thank you for all your messages about the state of the forecast wherever you might live, whether it's raining or not. This webinar is organised by Doctors in Distress, and our chair, Dame Professor Marvellous Dr. Claire Gerarda, will talk about that. But it's part of our launching of this new service, I suppose, that we're offering people, which is the Restore programme. And the particular thing that we're interested in this evening is the right space, which is all about how writing can help people sort of get through difficult times, cope with emotions, express their emotions, and so on and so forth. But the person who really can explain far more about that is Katie Amiel, who is a remarkable doctor, known to many of our panelists, most notably to Michael Rosen, who is one of our panelists. I'm going to be speaking to Michael Rosen and Rachel Clarke later on. But Katie's real claim to fame, if I may say, Katie, is that you saved Michael's lives. Others were involved, but you, the person, because I've read his remarkable book today and yesterday, he defines love. In it, he explains how if you hadn't gone round with your little machine, which you'd only just got, and worked out that the oxygen in his blood was extremely low and very dangerous, he wouldn't have gone straight to hospital and begun his remarkable escape from death. Anyway, Katie, tell us about the Restore programme, and notably the right space.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Katie Amiel. I'm a GP in Hackney, and I set up a project called the Bigger Picture Collaboration, which has worked with organisations like the Royal College of GPs and King's University to look at how the arts and humanities can help healthcare professional well-being and as such patient care. And as part of this, I worked with Michael Rosen and the poet Deborah Almer on an anthology of poetry, raising money for NHS charities called These Are the Hands, Poems from the Heart of the NHS. And we were overwhelmed by hundreds of submissions, incredibly moving submissions from NHS staff all over the UK, and had a real sense then of this need they had to reflect on and share their experiences through writing and poetry. The book was published actually just before the pandemic, and we had no idea at the time that the NHS was about to face its biggest challenge, or indeed that Michael's life would depend on the care of the NHS. Far from the arts and humanities and creativity being non-essential, it frills in times of crisis. I think the pandemic really highlighted the way in which they're actually a fundamental expression of our shared humanity, and fulfill a critical need we all actually share to reflect on and make sense of our experiences, and connect to our inner selves and also to each other. The artist Louis Bourgeois wrote that art is restoration. The idea is to repair the damages that are inflicted in life, to make something fragmented into something whole. And this has never felt more important than now, when so many staff are feeling broken, actually. So I'm really excited to be part of this new project, Restore, working with the charity Doctors in Distress and the NHS Practitioner Health Programme to offer NHS healthcare professionals free events, workshops, inspiring talks, focusing on the arts, and all of which will explore the central themes of the project, which are creativity, compassion, and contemplation. Our first collaboration is with the Royal Literary Fund, and they're generously providing experienced professional writers trained in facilitating small groups in expressive writing courses. And we'll be sharing the link to more information on how to sign up during today's event and on social media as well. And we've got many more exciting projects lined up, involving poetry, visual art, photography, theatre, and much more. The artist George Brack wrote, "Art is a wound turned into light." And when thinking about the power of the arts, and particularly today, writing, to allow us to reflect on transform and even transcend our experiences. I actually can't think of two people better than Michael and Rachel, who have both written so beautifully and powerfully about their experiences of the pandemic, and also in the past about their own personal experiences of loss and grief. So I'll hand over now to Dame Claire Gerarda, Professor Dame Claire Gerarda, Director of Practitioner Health Programme, Chair of Doctors in Distress, and very soon to be President of the Royal College of GPs. So over to you, Claire.
And thank you, Katie. And whilst you've had fabulous praise bestowed on you, I too would like to bestow praise on you, because I met you many, many years ago and you were still a very young GP. I think you'd only just qualified, and you had this great ambition to take arts into medicine, and you've been doing that ever since. I'd just like to thank you, because your perseverance is fabulous. So let me just be brief and to thank first of all our three fabulous panelists and our chair, Anna. So Doctors in Distress is a charity that was set up basically to provide similar safe spaces, but these will be in the first instance real spaces, but during the pandemic we provide virtual spaces for health professionals to come together to talk about the emotional impact of their work. Now, these aren't therapy groups, but there are spaces where people can just reflect on what's going on in their lives. And the charity was set up following the death through suicide of a cardiologist, Amandip, who's on this call, I know, brother. And what Amandip did was to spend the next 2 years establishing the charity, so nobody else need to have felt so alone as his brother did at that time. And his brother, as I said, killed himself. So the charity has been running throughout the pandemic, providing safe remote spaces at the moment that will be real again for doctors, nurses, paramedics, medical students, sometimes themed, so themed around, for example, long COVID or shielding. We had a whole series of groups for doctors, for Black doctors, and we're holding a whole group of sessions of groups for foundation doctors and for nurses and for others. And on the basis that a problem shared, it truly is a problem hard, we hope that we will help to reduce the rate of suicide amongst health professionals, not just doctors, but amongst nurses, doctors, paramedics, and importantly, help those that are doing the real sharp end of caring, who are doing the emotional work, the emotional toil, have somewhere to take that and don't feel so isolated in their day-to-day work. So whilst these aren't literary spaces, as Katie and Michael and Rachel will be talking about, they are in a sense literary, in that they allow people just to think, reflect, listen, and both to gain and give support to each other. So later on in this webinar, you'll hear a little bit more about, if you do wish to donate, how to do that. So now I'm going to hand you back over to Anna, I think, or is it Katie? See, I don't listen to the Anna. And good luck with the rest of the webinar. And thank you all for coming from all over the world. I saw somebody from Saudi Arabia just a little bit. And those of you that are anxious that you could be seen and heard, you can't. So if you want to put your music on full volume, we can't see or hear you. You can only see and hear us. So over to you, Anna.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Claire. Just following on from what Claire was saying about Doctors in Distress, you can check us out on our website and follow us on social media. We do Twitter, Facebook, all the things you would expect. But and you can see the sort of work we do. As Claire has described, it's not just this Restore program, but this is something that we are particularly interested about. And so I want now to turn to our two main guests, Michael Rosen and Dr. Rachel Clarke. Many of you will know both of them. They are remarkable authors. Rachel has had two books, notably Breathtaking, which deals with her experiences during the pandemic, and then a book which I have enjoyed, which is about it's called Dear Life, deals with the death of her father, and obviously from her remarkable perspective as a doctor specializing in palliative care. Michael Rosen will be known to many of you as a long-standing, brilliant author, poet, broadcaster, tweeter, everything. He wrote a book, a remarkable book, about the death of his son Eddie from meningitis, called A Sad Book, the Sad Book. And most recently, he wrote Many Different Kinds of Love, which again is a remarkable book following his remarkable recovery from COVID, and are following an incredibly long stay, not just in hospital, but on a ventilator. I'm going to start with Michael, if I may. So, hello, Michael.
Hello, Anna. Right.
Everybody be wanting to know, how are you?
Yeah,
you made a remarkable recovery.
Yes, I'm in pretty good nick. I try to walk about, and I live, as Katie knows, in a place called Muswell Hill. The name's a bit of a giveaway. It's got a hill, and if you walk down it, it's quite hard, and even if you walk up it, it's quite hard. So, you know, both ways, it's quite difficult. So yeah, I'm in reasonable good nick. I've lost most of the sight in my left eye, most of the hearing in my left ear. My toes are numb. But apart from that, a few aches and pains, but I am 75. So, you know, if you can't have aches and pains when you're 75, what's life for? And yes, I think I'm more or less, if anything, actually in slightly better nick than I was before I got COVID. So apart from the eye and the ear, a bit of balance occasionally, you know, I wobble, but never mind. Wobbling is quite creative.
Now, one of the things about this recent book, Many Different Kinds of Love, is that in fact, it starts with the writings of others. And this, I have to say, was new to me. So when you are in intensive care, and particularly when you're on a ventilator, these remarkable physios mainly, but nurses, some doctors, all the sorts of health workers were writing to you while you are in your induced coma. And did you know that that would happen before you went into your induced coma? I mean, obviously, in the minutes before you, they're not going to say, "Oh, by the way, the guys will all be keeping a little diary for you."
Keep a diary,
obviously.
guys. Yeah.
But did you know that this happened? Because it was certainly news to me.
To be absolutely honest, I knew next to nothing about intensive care. My wife, Emma, who Katie knows, it does watch 24 hours in A&E and the other intensive care programs. And when she said, when I came round, so let's come 48 days later, and she explained I was in intensive care, I just thought she meant I'd been cared for intensively. I had no idea. And it took at least 4 or 5 weeks before I'd fully clocked that I'd been lying there unconscious with a ventilator stuck down my throat. I hadn't actually realized that. So as for the diary, which I can show you right here, which the nurses and, as you say, the physios kept, I had no idea. I seem to remember at some point just before I left the Whittington Hospital to go to rehab, somebody saying they'd kept a diary. I think Emma snaffled it to make sure it didn't get lost. And then it sat on the table where I kind of looked at it in that slightly askance way that people do. Do I really want to open that? Do I really want to find out, you know, the stuff that I was doing? So I kind of resisted it, because it was a way in which I really didn't want to know. And it was only as I was putting the book together and we photocopied it and looked at it that I really confronted it. And even then I didn't read all of it. I think the first time I read absolutely every word in it was about 3 weeks ago. So I've resisted it, not because I disapprove of it in any way, but there have been times when I couldn't quite face up to it. But that's not to say that it acts as a form of bricks, the way I see it, as re-establishing who I am. It, in a way, it shored up my identity. Even the mere fact that it existed closed has, because it's evidence that I was struggling to stay alive, even if I didn't know about it. And then I selected some that are particularly kind of matter to me. And then I made an effort 3 weeks ago to read every single one of them. Yeah, it takes time. It takes time.
And was it? And must have been. Well, you tell me. What when you read the writings of others describing something of which, of course, you have no memory whatsoever, very limited memory. How was that for you? Reading what they were writing about you in remarkable and dreadful crisis that you.
Yes, I mean, it's a state of unconsciousness, and it really is unconscious. So I had no memory whatsoever of the period that I was sedated. I've seen film of me. There's the film 2020, The Story of Us, that's been shown on television on ITV. And I can see Hugh Montgomery, Professor Hugh Montgomery, is talking to me. And I answer. In fact, I try to make a joke, I can see. He says to me, I gather you've got children, Michael. And I reply, apparently. Now, there was some, I mean, so in my state of what I call semi-consciousness, really, rather than unconsciousness, I obviously heard him and I'm reacting and my eyes are looking at him and I'm saying that. But I have no memory of that whatsoever. And as it happens, that's got an echo for me in that I was knocked down in the road when I was 17. And apparently I was semi-conscious or in some state or other, at least until the morning afterwards. It was at night on the way back from school. And I have no memory of a period after I left school and, as it were, woke up in hospital the following morning. So I'm aware of this semi-conscious state that certainly I'm capable of living in, but I suspect one way or another, many human beings are. So to read the letters is not painful so much as explanatory. So one nurse describes the fact that she supports Derby and I support Arsenal, and I don't seem to be very impressed with the fact that she supports Derby, which, you know, is true to form for the kind of elitist club that Arsenal is. But anyway, it makes me a bit ashamed that I didn't turn and go, Derby, that's really interesting. But clearly I didn't. And then the fact, May the 7th, I think I'd been in the induced coma then for 4 weeks, I think. Everybody stood around my bed and wished me sang me happy birthday. Yeah. But again, no memory of that whatsoever. And of course, it was a very traumatic time for those people. They're hiding it in their letters because, in fact, I think Hugh said it was something like, maybe Katie knows, something like 60-40%. 60% were dying, 40% of us were surviving, which, you know, talking about the state of mind of health professionals, this is a heavy burden to carry, that you're caring for somebody. And in fact, one of the nurses has written a longer diary, private diary, which he sent me. He's in the book, he's Dan, and he sent it to me. And his entry on April the 10th, he calls me Mr. Jacobs in his diary. And he says, I walked past Mr. Jacobs' bed. He was still alive. Oh, I still think about that. He was still alive. So, you know, that's the state of mind. I'm sorry, I'm only laughing because it's so absurd in a kind of, you know, Hieronymus Bosch sort of way. Yes. But just the state of that ward at that moment, you know, at the height of the April pandemic and so on, that literally they didn't know when they came in the morning who was going to be alive and who wasn't. Yes. And so he's just noting that he sort of had wondered, because I was in such a state, that not only the oxygen levels, but I had blood clots in my in the saddle of my pulmonary vessels. So they were getting a bit worried whether I'd see it through.
On that note, talking about how bad things were, and of course, not bad for you, but also bad for the people looking after you, the state of intensive care, indeed all the COVID wards. Let me turn now, if I may, to Rachel Clarke. Hello, Rachel.
Hello.
We switch over. Hello, Rachel. Thank you for all that you have written. And I'm not sure that I introduced, I know Dear Life, which was dealt with the death of your father, but your latest book, just remind me of the full, because I may not have given the full title of that.
It's called Breathtaking.
It is breathtaking.
Yes, yeah.
But it deals with your time. Will you tell us what it deals with, and tell us, and also why you wrote it? I think it's really important to know and understand that.
Yeah, so it covers the first wave of COVID from the 1st of January last year through to the end of April. And I started writing it not as a book at all. But by the time we got to February, I was getting increasingly worried about what was clearly coming for us, like many healthcare workers, and increasingly uneasy about the fact that we hadn't locked down. We seemed to be very complacent as a country. And I had this sort of growing, sickening sense of dread, not least because my husband's a pilot and spent the first part of the year flying in and out of China and northern Italy. So these were the places that were hit so hard in the early days. And once the once COVID reached Italy and we could see their health service just falling apart in Lombardy with rationing of ventilators, running out of oxygen, it was terrifying to think that was coming for us. And when I am stressed, one of the first things I do is stop sleeping. So rather than wake up my husband at night, and even rather than talk to him about my worries, he thought I was being a bit of a sort of drama queen, you know, it's going to be fine, it's going to be like swine flu, it's not going to affect us. I would take myself off, remove myself from him, and sort of sit up in the kitchen drinking cups of tea and just bashing away on my keyboard. And it wasn't literary at all, it wasn't even for public consumption, it was just me trying to express my fears more than anything. And I think with hindsight, if I look back at that process, I suppose you can say that's a form of trying to find control over something. I had absolutely no control over the looming pandemic. And when it began and we were suddenly confronted with the human reality of a pandemic, which is death and dying on a scale and with an intensity that probably there are very few people in the NHS who have ever experienced that. Certainly it would have been in probably a foreign country. I just felt completely overwhelmed, and writing for me is a bit of a lifeline. It's something to hang on to, and I couldn't really say why I was doing it. I certainly wasn't then intending to write a book, but I bashed it out because I had to. It was just a little cry into the void. You couldn't talk to your colleagues because we were all in the same boat, and who was I to complain when everybody else was in the same boat? And I definitely couldn't talk to my family. So this book started out as a kind of nocturnal expression of fear, dread, overwhelmingness, and just being a little speck of a human being in the teeth of this monumental wave of pain and suffering that was consuming our hospitals and in some ways consuming the whole country. And it wasn't until after the first wave passed that I started to think I might want to try and shape this material and reflect upon this material and turn it into a book. And then the motivation overwhelmingly was not so much therapeutic for me, it was that I had this burning need to tell the story to others. So many people had spoken about the pandemic and so many things had been said that I strongly believed were wrong. They were inaccurate, they were lies. I felt on many occasions we had all the PPE we needed. There was no problem with testing. No care was rationed. Everyone got a ventilator who needed it. I knew full well every single one of those claims were lies. And I wanted to tell the story of what it was like from the inside, not just my story, but interviewing my colleagues, my patients, so that even if it was subjective and personal and in no sense comprehensive, it would be out there and it would be my expression and my little snapshot of what it was like. And I felt as though there was merit in doing that because I didn't believe the public knew.
So it was there are two prongs to it then. There is this is your way, like therapy. It's your way of just getting your emotions expressed in some way. And for you, that is through writing. How difficult is it though, to make sure that you do get that emotional release? I mean, the second bit is telling of your story and wanting it to be published in the world if you like to know it. But I'm interested to know, because obviously many people who will come on our course, will not have the great ability of you and Michael Rosen, if I may say, to write in the way that you both write. But nevertheless, we want people to come on these courses so that they can use it as therapy to express their emotions. How easy or difficult is it through writing to release all those emotions?
So the interesting thing is, I suspect I'm not alone amongst healthcare workers in finding it harder actually to have those kinds of therapeutic discussions face to face. I think we all feel we're not entitled to say, I have found this really hard. We all feel as though someone else has had it much, much harder than us, and we need to just pull our socks up and crack on and stop being so self-indulgent about it. Whereas, of course, this experience has been traumatic for everybody. There's no one who's unscarred by it. And I think to some extent, if you can get over the idea that you have to write well in inverted commas, because no one has to write well. Writing is something we do for ourselves and to try and communicate with other people. It's an act of caring. I find it incredibly powerful because, unlike writing in medicine, which is very, very focused on imparting objective information as speedily and accurately and concisely as possible, it has a very niche purpose, which is communicating amongst other professionals in a team. If instead you open yourself up to a different kind of writing where you're trying to articulate something inside you, even if that something is just a mess of emotion, and you can allow yourself not to know where your pen or your keyboard is going to take you, it can be the most liberating thing. So there were many, many occasions writing this book where I would start thinking, I'm going to describe this experience, and somehow my keyboard would take me away into something I had no idea was going to come out. And sometimes I would find myself crying as I wrote. And all of this morass was inside me, and there was something about just bashing away that enabled it to come out. And it didn't matter what the form was. It didn't need to be elegant or pretty. It was an expression of something that was true for me. And when I interviewed staff, something similar happened. So on many of those interviews, the staff member would say to me, this is the first time I have told anyone my story.
Yes.
And they would cry and I would cry, and we would realize that somehow we were sharing something precious, which was our real experience of this pandemic.
You see, for someone like me who is not a medic, but is involved in this charity, you are saying what so many other people have told us. I mean, obviously, as you know, people are involved, like Claire, involved in this charity, who are doctors and other health workers. And this, when you said pull your socks up, and this thing about people crying and saying, I thought it was just me who felt like that. And this idea, oh, just get on with it. You just battle on as a medic, because that's the kind of thing that you do. And it's a culture, actually, if I may say, which I think we have to get rid of. Yeah. But so this writing is cathartic for you, isn't it? And it is primarily for you. Nobody would criticize you for that.
Yeah. Although what you say about we need to get rid of the sort of stiff upper lip approach, I actually think it's trickier than that for healthcare workers, because you can't just give free rein to your emotions at work, because if you do, you may not be any good as a doctor or nurse or other healthcare professional. Yeah. If I'm in a situation where I'm having to tell a family that their loved one is dying or has died from COVID, they're not going to appreciate it if I start crying, because it's not about me. So in a way, the hardest thing I think in medicine is walking that tightrope between being absolutely steely, ice cold when it matters, because you have to be to do your job, while maintaining your empathy and warmth and all those instincts that make us a human being. And in a sense, I think walking that tightrope is the thing that, certainly in my experience, really puts me through the ringer, because I have to be hard as nails in the most difficult moments, but I have to find a way of not being so battle hardened that I'm burned out or mentally ill from that. Yeah.
And there is, of course, a real link here between what you're saying about the love that you have to feel for your patients. And I know that in Michael's book, which of course is called Many Different Kinds of Love, there is this clear link. And I'm just going to switch back to Michael, because if we can, he is still there, isn't he?
I'm here.
Hello, Michael. The thing that was, we've heard from Rachel, one of these remarkable health workers, right at the sharp end. And then in your book, we have them writing not about themselves when they do your diary. It's all about you. And these remarkable words about, oh, we did this to you today and we did that to you. And presumably this is one of the reasons why you called your book Many Different Kinds of Love.
Yes, indeed. I mean, what I felt, and I've written about in the book, is that I tried to think what kind of care it was that I received. So as I lay there thinking about it, the only analogy I could find was with the kind of care and love that parents had expressed towards me, or I've expressed to my children. So when our kids are ill, we don't just sit by the side of the bed and say, you're ill, and hand them some pills. We do other things. We sing them songs, and we hold their hand, and we stroke them, and we put our head round the door a couple of times, just to see whether they're still asleep or something. And we do all these other things. And the more I read the diaries, the more I could see was, yes, they may well have behaved in the way that you've described, Rachel, but they did actually also go that extra mile. They did hold my hand. Dan describes holding my hand when I was getting agitated, for reasons that nobody quite knows, when you become delirious on the drugs that they've put you on. And also how concerned they became that I stayed delirious longer than I needed to, and so on, and then how much they enjoyed the fact that Emma had sent in soundtracks that they were listening to themselves. And all this, I kind of read it and I thought, well, this sounds like my mum and dad, or this sounds like me talking to my kids. So I have a little poem where I'm talking about the fact that they're my parents. And then I think I just finished the poem by saying, but they're not my parents. And it's a way of me just acknowledging that they've treated me in this incredible way. And I think that was almost something that I struggled with the most, actually, as I, learned how to walk and rehabilitate and so on, that this huge power, this surge of care that I've received just to keep me alive, that I hadn't really tried very hard to be alive. I'd actually just sort of looked, from the point of view of my organism, not really done very well to start off with. But they were really doing fantastically. And why? They didn't know me. Some knew my books, but others, I was just this complete stranger. And so it's that idea of the love and care for a stranger. And I shouldn't really call it love, because they're not loving me, but they're caring for me in this way. And I found it quite overwhelming to start off with. I did sit there actually crying on a couple of occasions, just thinking and reading what they had written. As I said, I didn't read all of it in case I just got so overwhelmed and washed away with it. But and their writing, of course, is slightly different from Rachel's in the sense that they are very much addressed to me. They're very much aware of their audience. And though they do say things about, what they did and how they put their kids to bed the night before and things like that, it's not that full-on kind of self-reflection that Rachel's talking about. There needs to be another space for that. But by having done that, and they're not medical reports, I've got them as well, of course, it's a very special form of communication to kind of write to an inert being that you hope will wake up one day. It's a very special form. And these nurses, and as you say, actually physios, voice therapists who were recruited in order to shore up the NHS in this needy part of the system, they're remarkable letters. So they are quite incredible. And one person reviewed it and said it was a mistake to put them in. They're so ordinary. I thought, oh dear, no. Have you, point missed, point missed. Of course, they're ordinary and wonderful, Yeah. Sorry, you've frozen, Anna.
No, sorry. Yes. They're on pages 1-3, which is your 135 rather, which is your sort of defeat of death, which is incredibly powerful. And then you talked about your own children, and that other one at page 199. That is fabulous. So would you be so good as to read them for us?
Yeah. So this one goes like this. I'm a traveller who reached the land of the dead. I broke the rule that said I had to stay. I crossed back over the water. I dodged the guard dog. I came out. I've returned. I wander about. I left some things down there. It took bits of me as prisoner, an ear and an eye. They're waiting for me to come back. The ear is listening. The eye is the lookout. Now, one thing I just say there is that writing can be exactly the way Rachel described it, in that you just don't bother about how, you just come out with words and phrases and clauses and sentences. And quite a bit of my writing is like that. And we've learnt that from the modernist writers from 1900 onwards, that you don't have to shape everything in perfect sentences with capital letters and full stops. Yeah. You just put it down. Who's going to tell you you can't? There's no language police. There's no poetry police out there who's going to say, stop it. You just do it. And in actual fact, we can use other literatures to show us the way. So I use, if you like, modernist writing in order to inform me I can do that. But people with a slight classical education or whatever will know I was using something else there. I was using Homer and the fact that Odysseus goes to the land of the dead and he breaks all the rules and comes out again. Not that I was Odysseus, I was just a bloke in a ward at the Whittington Hospital. But the point about what literature does is it gives you shapes and forms that you can nick. And the great thing about it is that what that does is it gives you a vessel. It contains you and holds you. And within that, you can play with whatever you want, because we don't have to think of reading and writing as these inseparable things, partly the way we were taught in school. You can think of reading and writing as much more interfused, that you use the reading to go for the writing, and then you think, oh, my writing's a bit like that bit of reading. Because to tell the truth, there is no such thing as sort of new and innocent writing. It is always using other writings. It's called intertextuality, but anyway, it's fun.
This will inspire. I think this will, what you're saying, because I think there will be people who say, "Oh, I can't write. I can't do all of that." And what you're saying is, just do it.
Yeah, you do it, and allow yourself to be inspired by anything that still reverberates in your mind. It can be a song that you heard last week. It can be a song that can be a nursery rhyme. It can be anything. It could be a film where there was a bit of dialogue that just struck you as so powerful. I always remember this moment in, I think, is it in Chocolat, where she says something along the words about how beware of damaged people. They can be destructive. Words to that effect, anyway. Now, that reverberates in my mind. Now, I've never written anything like that, but I could just imagine myself saying on one occasion and playing with that as an idea. Well, that's the way we operate in the world of writing. And here's another form, which is the letter form, which is incredibly powerful. It was actually the birth of the novel. The novel was created out of the idea that they first came up with, is that you could create novels out of people writing. Dear children, I got ill. We get ill. You get ill. I'm getting over it, on the mend, people say. I'm doing my best, like you do your best. I don't know how it'll work out. We never know for certain. Well, that's the one thing we do know for certain, that we never know for certain. What we always have is now, the moment before the next moment. It's only the next moment we're not sure about. So whatever we've got to do, we have to do it now, in the moment that we have for certain. And that's what I'm trying to do. I can see you're doing things too. You're doing them now. That's good. It's the only time you can do them, but you know that. Lots and lots of love, Dad. So there's a shape, you see, and letters are great. You can write letters to yourself. You can write letters to your loved ones. You can write letters to the people you hate. You can write letters to the people you're grateful to. And if you allow yourself the spoken voice and allow yourself the space in a letter to do those reflections, it's a wonderful shape for you. And it can be as intimate or as distant as you want. And we've learnt that through emails. We've learnt to drop the formality of the old letters that we had to learn when I was at school in the 50s. So we can be just very informal. And you can write a letter to yourself. Dear Michael, you're behaving like a prat today. Do you see what I mean? You can just immediately reflect on it. And so it gives you an instant intimacy. And that's what people who've been over-schooled find quite difficult, because schooling quite often deprives you of intimacy, because a lot of the education we have is about, you know, these abstract ideas and these thoughts, and can you organize into paragraphs, you know, those of us done home education, PPEs and PPPs and all this stuff. And in actual fact, this kind of writing, you have to break all that down and find the intimacy. Otherwise you won't do what Rachel has been talking about, which is that this inchoate mush that is in our heads, and it's worth thinking of for a moment about the language of our inner speech. Part of it is it's very repetitive, and that's what causes us some of the trauma, is that we keep going back to the same thing, the dog to the bone. We nag in our minds that moment that is bothering us, when he said, she said, when I thought, I didn't do this, and you keep returning to it. The incredible advantage of writing, and it's slightly different from talking, is that it's reflective and it's slow and it's outside of yourself, and it preserves. You know, the very first origin of writing was to try and record the flour bags in ancient Sumeria. And in a way, all writing is the recording of ancient flour bags. So what you're doing is recording these moments, and then the moment you've got them, you can look at them and say, did I get that right? Was I cheating? Was I a fraud? Did I make that up? Was I being a drama queen? Or did I actually get to it there? If I didn't get to it, what else might I say? Or how might I revise it? So just to give you one example, on the back of the book, it says, a doctor is standing by my bed asking me if I would sign a piece of paper which would allow them to put me to sleep and pump air into my lungs. Will I wake up? I say. There's a 50-50 chance. If I say no, I say 0, he says, and I sign. Now, every time I looked at that after the book came out, I thought, well, actually, there's one bit of that that's a cheat, which is that when he said 50-50, I actually thought to myself, hey, that's not bad, you know, 50-50, that's quite good. Why I thought that, I've no idea. Was I already high on the stuff that Rachel gives us? I've no idea, and Katie. So I don't know. Can't even place when in my stay that I did that. But I thought, well, I haven't told the story. So I've actually written that again. And in one of the later editions of the book, it might say something like that, because I just thought, well, I haven't been actually authentic to what I thought at that very moment. Before I said, and I signed, I thought, God, 50-50. I'm in.
I must tell people, and obviously tell you, that one of the things that did make me laugh, and your book is, you know, it is uplifting. And although I did cry, I have to say, whilst reading it as well. But I love that bit where it was thought that in order to raise your blood pressure, because you had this really, really low blood pressure. And so you said, well, just bring in the Daily Mail. That'll sort out my blood pressure. It's going to rock it.
Yeah.
Rachel, you're laughing at that too. And it is a lovely minute. Look, a lot of for a lot of people, this could be very painful. Dealing, obviously, with the traumas and the awfulnesses that you saw, and no doubt still doing with COVID, but also dealing with the death of your father. This is painful stuff as well. And I don't know how you do that without, because there's got to be a way of doing it so that you don't actually exacerbate however you're feeling, make it worse. It's got to be something that is a release. Does that make, is that something you're aware of?
Yeah, so when I wrote Dear Life about Dad's death from cancer, and his diagnosis coincided with me specialising in palliative medicine, so it was really difficult, because suddenly every patient was the face of Dad's future. It's absolutely, you know, there's no doubt that writing parts of that book, particularly the chapter where I wrote about the final weeks of Dad's life, were very, very difficult to do. And in fact, in order to write that chapter, I had to actually go away physically from my family. I couldn't be with my husband and the kids. I had to be alone in a little B&B by myself, because I knew it was going to be hard. But I think one of the things and my motivation there was I wanted to try and share my experience of grief and of loss, both personally and in the hospice where I work, because I believed it was it could be valuable and positive for other people to read that experience. But I think what's very interesting about writing about difficult and traumatic experiences is sometimes the opposite to what you expect may happen, and you may find that instead of augmenting or exacerbating your distress, you may surprise yourself with what you learn. In a way, I think one of the most important things to try to do as a sort of bedrock from which to write is to pay attention. Writing is a kind of attentiveness. You're really paying attention to how things felt. What did you hear? What did you feel? What did you see? What did you smell? And sometimes paying attention in that way, really thinking about, as Michael says, the authenticity of an experience, what it was like for you, can reveal positivity and meaning and sometimes beauty that you just didn't realize was there. So one example from my father's last few days of his life, he insisted, he was a great mountaineer and walker, and he insisted on going out and walking to a magnolia tree in the village where he lived. And it was bitterly cold. It was Christmas. It was something like -5. And he put on his North Face coat and got his trekking poles that had taken him off to the base camp of Everest, and went out into this gale with myself and my brother kind of carefully following, terrified that he would just fall over, be blown away. He was so skeletally thin. And on the one hand, it was desperately sad. It was heartbreaking. But at the same time, there was something extraordinarily beautiful about his desire still to be himself and do what he loved and arrive at this kind of blasted old magnolia tree that was just every bit as windswept as he was. And he looked at it and it looked like a pitiful specimen, and he kind of cocked his eye and he said, "That magnolia tree is going to die soon." And it was and we all burst out laughing, because it sounded as though he was talking about himself. And he wasn't. He was talking about the tree that was the mirror image of himself, these two formerly strong and robust and oak-hearted beings that were on the brink of death. And I didn't realize any of that at the time, but when I wrote, I was able to see the strange beauty and poignancy in that experience, and it didn't stop it being painful. But I really lived it in a different way simply through the act of writing it. And I know that in writing about the pandemic, which was obviously very distressing to experience in many ways, I experienced something similar. I started to see through really paying attention to that time something really remarkable, which was all the myriad 1,001 ways in which staff in these impossibly horrible circumstances tried through their PPE, through their gloves and masks and visors, to still maintain a connection of humanity with their patients. And it might be writing a patient diary, or holding a patient's hand, or talking to them, or simply sitting with them so they know they're not alone. But I felt as though in the darkness of the pandemic, there were these little starry specks of light everywhere. And these were my colleagues and me trying our hardest to be human beings and convey and transmit that love to our patients when they were so frightened and so lonely, so that they knew someone was there for them and that they mattered to somebody. And that's the kind of thing you can learn through writing. So it's risky, it's going into potentially dark places, but it can be very, very powerfully positive.
Yes. Michael, the positives, obviously, of what you went through in hospital, I think are many, including your book. how easy was it, or was it not, emotionally, to write your book about your experiences during that dreadful experience, that dreadful time?
For me, I have to say it's slightly the other way round. That's to say, writing is a bit of an itch that I have to scratch. So if things happen to me, then my response is to write about it. So I'm in a slightly different place, I'm guessing, from most of the professionals who are listening to this, because it may be writing is this kind of writing that we're talking about, of free writing and expressive writing, emotional writing, reflective and so on. It's not maybe what you do usually. It may be for some of you, I realize, but for me, it is as ordinary as cooking a meal. Or of just watching the telly, really, that I just think, oh, I'll scribble something down. So I've been having a bit of fun just this last couple of days. The fact that people say to me, how long were you in a coma? And I end up saying 40 days. And then I go, well, 40 days and 40 nights. And I had an ordinary school Christian education. And so, of course, I say 40 days and 40 nights. And suddenly I'm thinking of Noah. And, and throwing the dove out, and then dove coming back with the olive branch. And then I'm thinking of Jesus in the wilderness and being tempted, and then making certain decisions at the end of it. And so I just had a little riff on 40 days and 40 nights, because it sort of, it amuses me that this comes out of my mouth. So it's just another, so it becomes an itch. I think I want to deal with this 40 days, 40 nights thing that's in my mind. So I scribbled it out, bunged it up on Twitter and Facebook, and there it is. So for me, it's slightly different. So in the writing, I deal with that itch. The itch doesn't bother me anymore. I'm guessing for some people listening, it'll be the other way around. It isn't itching to be done. And you might have to, as it were, discover ways in which you can, as it were, scratch sufficiently in order to let this thing out that is perhaps bothering you. Or you can play at experimenting and just see where you go. I mean, there's some people have described taking your pen for a walk. I mean, it may be that without you knowing that, in fact, spending 5 minutes just jotting a few things down and not what, thinking, well, it's no more than really a shopping list of what I was thinking today. And you might want to link things up. You might even want to repeat some phrases. I sometimes do that just to listen to the kind of music of a phrase that I've said, or you might play around with the notion of lexical field. There's a nice thing to play with. Lexical field is the idea that we have many words that might describe something in a similar zone. So if you just take the notion of lightness, light. And so there's lots of words we have to express light and light things, and there's light verbs, and there's all sorts of things. And you could just have a bit of fun. But it might also be words about pain. Now, I know you have your own pain indexes, you doctors, but you might want to think about pain and the way it is metaphorically and the way it is. And you don't have to worry about it. It's just a little game that you play on a piece of paper, just like you might doodle when somebody's going on a bit on the telephone or while I'm talking now. So you can use these as ways of playing, and this sometimes will take you places. And it doesn't matter. You just enjoy it, and it will get to a point where it'll reach the things that really matter to you. The pain or the distress or the anxiety or the hopes, the envies, some stuff that matters, even though you just started with a word doodle.
One of the things that I don't know about others, I've suddenly realized don't think I've ever written anything that somebody didn't mark. And what you've said, which is just bowled me away, is write never. By thinking, oh, have I used the right word in the right place and all the rest of it. Rachel, can I just ask you, how did you, I think Michael Rosen's just been writing for the entirety of his life. He's had this itch. But for you, Rachel, did a time come where you had to learn how to write in the way that you do, or did it just come naturally to you?
Well, I was always a bit of a writer, even from an early age. I used to write books when I was still at junior school, stories that I called books. And I always thought I'd be a writer when I grew up, but then I fell in love with science. So I always wrote, and I was a journalist before I qualified as a doctor. So but television journalist. So I wasn't writing properly as I think print journalists do. So in actual fact, what happened was when I became a doctor, and really when I became a medical student, I made a very self-conscious decision not to write. I certainly wasn't going to do anything journalistic. I was going to put that old life behind me and simply be a doctor. And it's quite busy learning medicine and being a junior doctor, and I was a mum as well. So I didn't have time to write even if I wanted to, but I made this very, very deliberate decision to set that on one side. And then one of your former colleagues, Jeremy Hunt, stirred me up into action with my pen again during the junior doctor dispute. But we'll move on from that swiftly. But what I found, and this was very, very interesting, was all those years that I had very deliberately stopped writing and didn't know that I missed it. I was happy, I was busy, I was loving learning my medicine, working with patients day to day was just a joy and a privilege. But when I started writing again, after a gap of about a decade, suddenly something was unleashed inside me that had been locked away for a decade that I hadn't realised I needed and loved, and was such an integral part of me, a way of expressing what was inside. I only ever write things that I have to get out. Michael's itch, I need to write them. I have this desire to get them out. And for those people who are listening who don't have that desire, I wonder if it's possibly because you've never tried it. And so for that decade, I didn't have an itch. I didn't have anything I was desperate to get out because I'd very deliberately shut that side of myself away. But once it was unleashed, I realised how important it was for me to express myself. And there's, you know, lots of writers talk about the greatest anguish can be that feeling of having an unvoiced story inside of you, something that you are not expressing, you're suppressing, no one else is hearing it. Have a go. Exactly. And, you know, thank you so much for that, because have a go. We are running this Restore programme. You can get all the details on our website. You can also donate, if I may say, to Doctors in Distress. Rachel, thank you. Michael, thank you as also so very much for giving up your time. And thank you both for your wonderful, wonderful books and the way that you speak about our brilliant NHS and its workers. And I think it's really important to say that the Restore programme and the right space is for all health workers. It's not just for doctors, it's for everybody. And I think we've now run out of time, but please, as I say, check out our website. And thank you again, Katie, especially for saving Michael's life. But thank you, Rachel, and thank you to Michael as well. And I hope that everybody's been watching this webinar, and there'll be an edited version of it available. And thank you as well, of course, to Claire. There'll be an edited version of it available on the website. All the links are all going to be there. And thank you. Sign up for the Restore programme, the right space, and please donate to Doctors in Distress. Thank you all very much indeed, and have a great evening.
And thank you, Anna, for chairing it so beautifully and for being such an expert. Thank you all. Lots of love. And
thank you, everybody.
Take
Thanks,
care.
guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you,
very
Michael.
much, everybody. Thank you.
Oh, love Michael, Rosen, and you, Rachel.
Oh, thank
masses
you.
Of,
we
all
want to give
Three
Michael Rosen a kiss.
We do, actually.
Thank you, Michael.
It's wonderful.
Overwhelming.
Michael, thank you.
As long as you've had a negative lateral
Next time I see you, I'm definitely going to break COVID rules and give you a kiss.
Brilliant. Take care. Lots of love. Thanks,
Bye,
Anna.
everybody.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye
Have a good
all.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.